One of the most important things to remember when you're beginning watercolor is to use enough water. I think that is probably the one mistake I see most often with students who are just kind of starting their experience with watercolor, is that they're not using enough water. So I have a bunch of very dry pans of watercolor here. And then before I get started with my painting, I have to kind of redissolve or reconstitute this paint. So I need to make sure that I am adding enough water, so that I'm adding water and that I'm dissolving some of that pigment. And then I'm not painting directly from the pan. I'm taking this paint and I'm putting it on my little palette here. It's a very small palette, so hopefully you have a bigger palette, but I'm taking the paint and putting it on the palette, and then I'm preparing the paint to put on the paper from the palette itself, okay? So I'm not mixing any colors here. I'm just taking the paint from here and I'm mixing and either diluting, adding more water or more paint. I'm preparing my paint on the actual palette before putting it on the paper. And you really want to make sure that you have enough water. I want you to notice how saturated my brush becomes. Notice how saturated that is. Notice how much paint is on that brush. If your brush is not this saturated, you're not using enough water. And so when I actually go and put it on the paper, notice how much water and how it just kind of flows off the brush. Watercolor, you need to have enough water, and that paint really kind of needs to flow. That's what watercolor does, okay? So if the paint on your paper doesn't have this much flow to it, you're not using enough water. You need to add more water, okay? So that is the first thing to keep in mind, that you really want to make sure that you're using enough water as you paint. All right.